For years, the world believed that the deepest wounds inside the British royal family died quietly behind palace walls. But according to growing royal speculation, one conversation involving Princess and Prince Harry may have reopened emotions the monarchy spent decades trying to bury. And at the center of it all was a final memory connected to Diana, Princess of Wales herself. Those closest to the royal family have always described Princess and as one of the most disciplined and emotionally controlled members of the monarchy. She rarely gives interviews, almost never participates in royal drama, and has spent most of her life protecting the institution instead of feeding headlines. That is exactly why recent whispers surrounding her private exchange with Harry have stunned royal watchers across the world. Because if and truly spoke about Diana's final thoughts regarding Harry, then this was not palace gossip anymore. It was something far more personal. The alleged conversation reportedly happened during one of the most difficult periods in Harry's relationship with the royal family. Tensions were already exploding publicly after his departure from royal duties with Meghan Markle. Interviews, documentaries, and accusations had fractured trust inside the monarchy. Behind the scenes, insiders claimed several senior royals stopped believing reconciliation was even possible. But Princess and remained unusually silent through all of it. That silence mattered. Unlike many members of the family, and had witnessed Diana's rise and collapse from the very beginning. She saw the pressure Diana faced after marrying King Charles III, then known as Prince Charles. She also witnessed how the global obsession with Diana transformed the monarchy forever. While others focused on public image and reportedly paid closer attention to the emotional damage happening behind closed doors. And according to longtime royal observers, Diana's greatest fear was never actually about herself. It was about Harry. Even as a child, Harry was seen as the more emotional and unpredictable royal compared to his older brother, Prince William. William was raised as the future king. The institution naturally revolved around preparing him for the throne. Harry, meanwhile, often occupied the uncomfortable role historically known within royal circles as the spare. It was a title that came with privilege, but also confusion. He had status, fame, and enormous public attention, yet no clearly defined long-term purpose within the monarchy. Many royal historians now believe Diana recognized that imbalance long before the public did. She reportedly worried Harry would struggle with identity, isolation, and resentment as he grew older. Unlike William, whose destiny was mapped out from birth, Harry would eventually have to find meaning on his own while living inside one of the most rigid institutions in the world. Diana allegedly feared that emotional conflict would one day push him away from the palace entirely. For years, those concerns sounded exaggerated. Harry appeared happy in public. He became known as the fun prince, the rebellious soldier, the charismatic younger brother who connected easily with ordinary people. His military service earned admiration. His humor made him relatable. Crowds loved him in ways that reminded many people of Diana herself. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. After Diana's death in 1997, Harry was forced to navigate unimaginable grief under the gaze of the entire world. Millions still remember the haunting image of the young prince walking behind his mother's coffin beside William, Charles, and his grandfather, Prince Philip. It became one of the defining royal images of the modern era. Years later, Harry admitted publicly that the trauma from that moment never truly left him. That is why recent speculation surrounding Princess has become so emotionally powerful. Some royal commentators believe and may have privately reminded Harry that Diana always feared he would carry the heavier emotional burden. Not because she loved him more, but because she believed he felt everything more deeply than the rest of the family. If true, those words would explain why Harry's separation from the monarchy became more than a royal controversy. It became the collision between personal pain and royal duty. And perhaps most tragically of all, it may have confirmed something Diana understood decades earlier, that the son who inherited most of her emotional vulnerability might also become the one least capable of surviving life inside the palace walls. By the time Prince Harry left Britain with Meghan Markle, many inside palace circles reportedly viewed the situation as an act of betrayal. Senior royals had spent decades preserving the image of unity inside the monarchy, even during scandal, divorce, and public humiliation. But Harry's departure shattered something deeper than tradition. For the first time in modern royal history, a senior member of the family openly walked away from the institution while publicly criticizing it from the outside. And according to royal insiders, that was the moment old memories of Diana, Princess of Wales, began resurfacing behind closed doors. Because Diana had once done something very similar. Long before Harry's interviews and documentaries dominated headlines, Diana herself had challenged the palace publicly. Her famous television interview in the 1990s shook the monarchy to its core. She spoke openly about loneliness, emotional pain, betrayal, and feeling trapped inside royal life. At the time, many within the institution considered her honesty dangerous. Yet, decades later, people began noticing uncomfortable similarities between Diana's emotional struggles and Harry's own public confessions. That parallel reportedly disturbed several senior royals, including Princess Anne, and has always been viewed as the opposite of Diana in temperament. Where Diana was emotional and media-driven and was disciplined and private, Diana connected emotionally with the public and respected structure, duty, and restraint. Yet despite their differences and understood something many people overlooked, Diana's emotional vulnerability was not weakness. It was part of what made millions of people love her. And perhaps that same emotional intensity lived inside Harry. Royal commentators have often noted that Harry inherited more than Diana's appearance or charisma. He inherited her instinct to resist control. Throughout his life, Harry struggled against rigid expectations imposed by palace advisors, royal traditions, and media pressure. Even during his younger years, stories emerged of arguments with palace staff, frustration over press intrusion, and growing resentment toward how royal life limited personal freedom. But after marrying Meghan, those tensions escalated dramatically. Harry no longer seemed willing to silently tolerate the machinery of the monarchy. Public appearances became tense. Rumors of conflict between Harry and Prince William intensified. Reports described emotional divisions between the brothers that shocked people who once viewed them as inseparable after Diana's death. Then came the interviews. The accusations about lack of support, emotional neglect, media manipulation, and institutional coldness created global outrage. Some defended Harry and Meghan completely. Others accused them of damaging the monarchy for personal gain. But inside the palace, the emotional impact reportedly went far beyond public relations. Because for older royals, it felt hauntingly familiar. Some insiders believed Princess and privately understood that Harry was reliving emotional battles Diana once faced herself. The fear of isolation, the pressure of public expectation, the feeling of becoming trapped between personal truth and royal obligation. While and may not have agreed with Harry's choices, many royal watchers suspect she recognized the emotional pattern immediately. And that is why rumors surrounding Anne's alleged conversation with Harry became so explosive. According to speculation circulating among royal commentators, it may have quietly told Harry that Diana always worried the palace would eventually break his spirit if he stayed too long without finding his own identity outside the institution. Whether those exact words were ever spoken remains impossible to verify. But emotionally, many people believe the idea fits Diana's known concerns about her youngest son. Unlike William, Harry was never meant to become king. Yet he still lived under enormous scrutiny while lacking the clear purpose that defined William's future. Over time, that imbalance may have created emotional instability that neither the family nor the institution fully understood. Even today, body language experts and royal biographers continue analyzing the growing emotional distance between the brothers. Public appearances that once showed warmth now appear formal and cautious. Moments of genuine closeness have become increasingly rare. And for many observers, the tragedy is not simply about royal disagreement anymore. It is about the collapse of a family bond that once survived unimaginable grief together. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part is that Diana reportedly tried very hard to protect both boys from exactly this outcome. Friends of Diana often described her as deeply aware of how differently William and Harry would experience royal life as adults. She allegedly feared William would become consumed by duty, while Harry might become consumed by emotional conflict and loneliness. Looking back now, many believe both fears came true in completely different ways. And somewhere inside the silence of Buckingham Palace, there may still be members of the royal family wondering whether Diana understood the future far better than anyone realized at the time. As public tensions continued growing between Prince Harry and the monarchy, another uncomfortable truth slowly emerged inside royal circles. Harry was no longer simply fighting against palace traditions. In many ways, he appeared to be fighting against decades of unresolved grief that began the night Diana, Princess of Wales, died in Paris. People often forget how young Harry truly was when the tragedy happened. He was only 12 years old, at an age when most children still rely completely on emotional protection from their parents. Harry suddenly became one of the most photographed, grieving children in the world. Every expression on his face was captured forever. Every step behind Diana's coffin became part of global history. And according to many royal experts, that moment changed him permanently. Over the years, Harry repeatedly hinted that he never fully processed the emotional trauma. Instead, he buried it beneath royal duty, military service, public appearances, and eventually marriage. But grief that deep rarely disappears quietly. It waits, sometimes for years. Some insiders believe Princess Anne understood this better than most members of the royal family. Unlike public-facing royals who focused heavily on optics and developed a reputation for observing people carefully without speaking unnecessarily, she lived through multiple royal crises herself and witnessed how emotional repression became normalized inside the monarchy. Public composure mattered more than vulnerability. Silence mattered more than emotional honesty. That system may have protected the institution, but critics argue it often damaged the individuals living inside it. For Harry, the emotional conflict eventually became unbearable. When he began speaking publicly about therapy, trauma, anxiety, and panic attacks, reactions inside royal circles were reportedly mixed. Some admired his openness. Others believed he was violating the unspoken rules of royal survival. Because historically, members of the monarchy were expected to endure suffering privately, regardless of personal cost. But Harry no longer seemed willing to live by those rules. That rebellion became even more explosive after the release of interviews and projects where he described feeling abandoned by the institution during some of the darkest periods of his life. To supporters, Harry appeared courageous for exposing emotional realities hidden behind royal glamour. To critics, he seemed determined to damage his own family publicly. Yet beneath the political arguments and media outrage, there remained a much sadder question. Was Harry actually trying to destroy the monarchy, or was he desperately trying not to become emotionally destroyed by it himself? That distinction changed everything. Because if Princess Anne truly spoke to Harry about Diana's fears before her death, then the conversation may not have been about blame at all. It may have been about recognition. Recognition that Diana saw emotional warning signs in Harry long before the world did. Several royal biographers have noted that Diana shared a uniquely intense bond with Harry. She reportedly worried about his sensitivity, impulsiveness, and emotional dependence from an early age. While William often appeared composed and cautious, Harry was more reactive, more openly emotional, and far more vulnerable to public pressure. Ironically, those same traits later made millions of people connect with him. Just like Diana, Harry often appeared more human than royal. He laughed too loudly, spoke too openly, reacted emotionally instead of diplomatically. Even his mistakes made him feel relatable to ordinary people in ways the monarchy often struggles to achieve naturally. But relatability inside the royal system can become dangerous. The institution depends heavily on emotional discipline, controlled messaging, and stability. Individuals who challenge that structure, intentionally or emotionally, frequently become sources of institutional anxiety. Diana experienced that reality firsthand during the final years of her life. And now, many observers believe Harry walked directly into the same collision decades later. Meanwhile, the emotional distance between Harry and Prince William only appeared to worsen. That deterioration devastated royal watchers because the brothers once symbolized unity after unimaginable loss. They were viewed not just as princes, but as two grieving sons who survived tragedy together. The public believed that shared pain created an unbreakable bond. Yet adulthood, responsibility, marriage, media pressure, and institutional expectations slowly pulled them apart. Some insiders claim William became increasingly frustrated with Harry's public attacks on the monarchy, especially because William remains directly tied to the future of the crown. Unlike Harry, he cannot walk away. Duty defines every part of his existence. That reality reportedly created emotional resentment on both sides. Harry feeling trapped and misunderstood, William feeling burdened and betrayed. And somewhere in the middle of that emotional collapse stands the memory of Diana, a mother who reportedly spent years trying to shield her sons from the emotional machinery of royal life, only for both of them to become consumed by it in completely different ways. Which is perhaps why rumors surrounding Princess and continue haunting royal discussions today. Because if and truly reminded Harry of Diana's private fears, then the message may have carried an unbearable emotional weight. Not simply that Diana loved him, but that she may have known, long before anyone else, that Harry would someday reach a breaking point the monarchy itself could never fully understand. In recent years, one detail about Prince Harry has become impossible for royal observers to ignore. The more openly he speaks about pain, trauma, and emotional exhaustion, the more people are reminded of Diana, Princess of Wales. Not because their lives were identical, but because both seemed to reach a point where silence became psychologically unbearable. For decades, the British monarchy survived by maintaining emotional control in public. Royal family members were trained to project stability no matter what personal suffering existed behind palace walls. Scandals were contained. Feelings were restrained. Personal breakdowns were handled privately. The crown always came first. Diana changed that formula forever. She brought emotion into an institution built on restraint. Her vulnerability made her beloved globally, but it also created tension inside the palace system. Many historians now believe the monarchy never fully understood how to manage someone as emotionally expressive and globally influential as Diana. She did not operate like a traditional royal. She connected directly with people's emotions, often bypassing palace protocols entirely. Years later, Harry would begin doing something eerily similar. When he discussed mental health publicly, criticized media harassment, and challenged royal structures openly, supporters saw courage. Critics saw recklessness. But regardless of opinion, one reality became undeniable. Harry no longer behaved like someone willing to suppress emotional pain for the sake of institutional image. And that may have deeply unsettled senior royals, such as Princess Anne, and belongs to an older generation shaped by duty above all else. She spent her entire life surviving royal pressure through discipline and emotional containment. Unlike Diana, and rarely revealed vulnerability publicly. Even during personal hardship, she continued royal engagements with almost military consistency. That contrast makes speculation about her alleged private conversation with Harry even more fascinating. Because if and truly acknowledge Diana's fears about Harry, then it suggests something extraordinary. Even the monarchy's most disciplined figures may privately recognize the emotional damage royal life can create. Some royal experts believe Anne's silence over the years was not indifference, but observation. She watched the monarchy evolve through crisis after crisis. She witnessed the collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage. She saw how public sympathy overwhelmingly shifted toward Diana after the divorce. And perhaps most importantly, she watched two young boys lose their mother while the entire world watched in real time. No amount of royal training could erase that trauma. What makes the story even more tragic is how differently William and Harry appear to have responded to grief. Prince William reportedly adapted by embracing structure, responsibility, and long-term duty. Over time, he became increasingly aligned with the institution he was born to lead. Harry, however, appeared to move in the opposite direction. Rather than finding security inside the system, he seemed increasingly emotionally suffocated by it. That divergence may explain why the brothers slowly stopped understanding each other. To William, protecting the monarchy may feel inseparable from protecting family legacy itself. To Harry, protecting his emotional well-being and immediate family may eventually have become more important than preserving royal tradition. Both perspectives contain emotional logic, and that is precisely why the conflict became so devastating. There was no easy villain, only different forms of survival. Meanwhile, public fascination with Diana's memory continued growing year after year. Every interview Harry gave seemed to pull her presence back into modern royal conversations. In many ways, Diana remained emotionally alive inside every public disagreement surrounding Harry's departure. Her shadow never truly left the monarchy. Some royal commentators even argue that Harry's battle with the institution was partially fueled by unresolved anger over how Diana was treated during the final years of her life. Harry has repeatedly criticized media intrusion, manipulation, and lack of institutional protection, the very issues many people believe contributed to Diana's emotional collapse before her death. That emotional connection may explain why rumors involving Princess and continue spreading so rapidly online. Because people desperately want to know whether someone inside the royal family finally admitted what Diana supposedly feared all along. That Harry was never emotionally built for palace life. And perhaps even more painfully that Diana knew it. If those fears were real, then Diana may have spent her final years carrying a quiet anxiety no mother could easily escape. The fear that one son would inherit the throne, while the other inherited the emotional burden of living beside it. Today, the monarchy continues moving forward publicly. Official events continue. Ceremonies continue. Appearances continue. But beneath the polished image of royal stability, emotional fractures remain impossible to fully hide. The distance between Harry and the family still dominates headlines. Reconciliation rumors rise and collapse constantly. Public trust shifts with every interview and every silence. Yet through all the speculation, one haunting possibility continues lingering over the entire story. That somewhere, long before the world saw the cracks forming, Diana herself may already have understood exactly how this painful royal tragedy would unfold. What makes this royal story so emotionally complicated is that no matter how much time passes, Diana, Princess of Wales, still seems to exist at the center of every major fracture inside the monarchy. Her absence became a permanent presence. And nowhere is that more visible than in the painful evolution of Prince Harry. Many royal insiders believe Harry spent years trying to balance two completely different identities. One part of him remained loyal to royal duty, tradition, and family expectation. But another part increasingly resembled Diana, emotionally open, resistant to control, and deeply uncomfortable living inside a system built on silence and hierarchy. That internal conflict may explain why Harry's behavior often appeared contradictory to the public. At times, he seemed committed to royal life. He served in the military, represented the crown internationally, and became one of the monarchy's most popular younger figures. Crowds admired his warmth and spontaneity. Unlike many senior royals, Harry often looked emotionally accessible. He hugged people, spoke casually, laughed freely. In many ways, he inherited Diana's ability to make ordinary people feel seen. But behind the scenes, pressure was reportedly building for years. Royal life does not simply involve fame. It involves constant scrutiny, carefully managed public image, relentless media attention, and institutional expectations that shape nearly every personal decision. Friends of Harry have suggested that over time, he became increasingly exhausted by the loss of privacy and emotional autonomy. Then came the turning point. After meeting Meghan Markle, Harry appeared more protective and emotionally defensive than ever before. He repeatedly referenced fears about history repeating itself. To many observers, those comments were unmistakably connected to Diana. Harry openly admitted he worried about media pressure affecting Meghan the same way it affected his mother decades earlier. That fear reportedly intensified existing tensions inside the royal family. Some believed Harry became overly suspicious of palace systems and media relationships. Others argued he was simply seeing realities Diana had already experienced herself. Either way, the emotional divide between Harry and the institution widened dramatically. And according to growing speculation, this may have been the emotional context surrounding Princess Anne's alleged private remarks. Unlike public commentators who reduce royal conflicts to simple drama and likely understood the deeper generational patterns at play, she witnessed how Diana's emotional struggles were misunderstood during the 1980s and 1990s. She saw how public sympathy transformed Diana into a global icon after years of institutional tension. And perhaps she recognized that Harry's rebellion was not emerging from nowhere. It was emerging from emotional wounds left unresolved since childhood. That possibility changes how many people interpret Anne's role entirely. Because if Anne truly told Harry that Diana worried about him before her death, the statement may not have been intended as criticism. It may have been something far more devastating. Confirmation. Confirmation that Diana saw emotional fragility developing in Harry long before the public ever noticed it. Some royal biographers believe Diana became increasingly protective of Harry precisely because she sensed how differently he processed emotion compared to William. While William adapted toward control and restraint, Harry reportedly absorbed emotional experiences much more intensely. Diana herself once described Harry as sensitive and deeply affectionate, traits that can become difficult burdens inside highly controlled institutions. Ironically, those same qualities later made Harry globally relatable. Millions of people connected with his openness about trauma, therapy, grief, and emotional struggle. Younger generations especially viewed his honesty as refreshing compared to traditional royal restraint. But inside the monarchy, emotional transparency carries risks. It destabilizes carefully managed narratives. It invites public scrutiny into private dysfunction. And perhaps most importantly, it threatens the illusion that royal privilege protects people from emotional suffering. That illusion shattered completely after Harry's public interviews. Suddenly, audiences around the world were hearing a senior royal describe feelings of loneliness, panic, institutional coldness, and psychological exhaustion. Whether people agreed with him or not, the emotional rawness felt startlingly similar to Diana's own public vulnerability decades earlier. For some royal watchers, it almost felt as though history itself was repeating. A popular royal figure becomes emotionally overwhelmed. The institution struggles to respond. The media intensifies pressure. Family relationships deteriorate. And the public divides into opposing sides. Even today, analysts continue debating whether reconciliation between Harry and Prince William is truly possible. The emotional damage appears deep. Trust reportedly collapsed after years of leaks, interviews, memoirs, and private conflicts becoming global headlines. Yet despite everything, people still remain emotionally invested in the possibility of healing. Perhaps because the brothers symbolize something larger than monarchy itself. They symbolize two children shaped by extraordinary grief in completely different ways. And somewhere behind all the headlines, speculation, and palace silence, the memory of Diana continues hovering over every conversation, not simply as a tragic princess, but as a mother who may have understood her youngest son more clearly than anyone realized. A mother who perhaps feared that one day, Harry would reach the same painful conclusion she once did herself, that surviving inside the royal system emotionally might come at a cost too heavy to bear forever. What many people inside and outside the monarchy still struggle to understand is this. Prince Harry did not just walk away from a job, a title, or a royal residence. In many ways, he walked away from the entire identity he had been born into. That kind of separation comes with enormous emotional consequences. For most people, leaving a difficult environment still allows them to remain connected to family history and personal identity. But for Harry, royal life was not simply part of his world. It was his entire world from birth. Every school, every relationship, every public moment, every trauma, and every responsibility existed within the shadow of the monarchy, which is why his departure shocked the world so deeply. To supporters, Harry appeared to be choosing emotional survival over institutional expectation. To critics, he seemed to abandon family duty at the very moment the monarchy needed unity most. But beneath those public arguments was a quieter reality that few people discussed openly. Harry himself often looked emotionally exhausted. Even during interviews, there were moments where he seemed less angry than wounded. That distinction matters, because anger eventually burns out. Wounds remain. Some royal commentators believe that is precisely why the alleged conversation involving Princess Anne resonated so strongly with audiences, and is not associated with emotional theatrics. She rarely participates in royal media wars. Her public image has remained remarkably stable for decades. So when rumors emerged suggesting she privately acknowledged Diana's concerns about Harry, people immediately paid attention. It created the impression that even the monarchy's most loyal insiders may quietly understand more than they publicly admit. And perhaps no one understood the emotional cost of royal life better than Diana, Princess of Wales. By the final years of her life, Diana had become both globally adored and emotionally isolated. She was one of the most famous women on earth, yet many biographers describe her as deeply lonely inside the royal structure. Publicly, she represented glamour, compassion, and emotional warmth. Privately, she reportedly battled anxiety, heartbreak, distrust, and intense pressure from both the media and palace systems. That contradiction may have left a lasting psychological mark on Harry, because as he grew older, he watched the world continue idolizing Diana while also learning painful details about her suffering behind the scenes. For Harry, Diana was never merely a public icon. She was his mother. And according to many royal observers, her death became the defining emotional event of his entire life. Some psychologists who study trauma have even noted that unresolved childhood grief can shape adult decision-making for decades. Certain fears become amplified. Emotional threats feel more urgent. Protective instincts become stronger. Seen through that lens, Harry's intense efforts to protect Meghan Markle from media pressure begin to look less like overreaction and more like unresolved fear repeating itself. Fear that history could happen again. That fear reportedly influenced nearly every major decision Harry made after leaving royal life. Security battles, legal disputes with newspapers, public interviews, relocation to the United States. Much of it seemed driven by a determination to avoid reliving the emotional helplessness he experienced as a child after Diana's death. And perhaps that is where the tragedy becomes most painful. Because while Harry tried to escape the emotional patterns surrounding Diana, he also appeared increasingly consumed by them. The more he spoke publicly about his mother, trauma, and institutional failure, the more the comparisons intensified. To some observers, Harry was preserving Diana's truth. To others, he was becoming trapped inside her legacy emotionally. Meanwhile, the monarchy itself continued facing a difficult balancing act. King Charles III reportedly desired reconciliation at various points, but tensions remained fragile. Public trust between family members appeared severely damaged. Every meeting became headline news. Every silence became subject to speculation. Even small gestures were analyzed endlessly by the media. At the center of it all remained the fractured relationship between Harry and Prince William. For years, the brothers represented emotional continuity after Diana's death. The public projected enormous hope onto their bond. People believed their shared grief made them inseparable. But adulthood revealed something far more complicated. Shared trauma does not always create permanent unity. Sometimes it creates entirely different coping mechanisms that slowly pull people apart. William reportedly coped through duty, structure, and loyalty to the institution. Harry appeared to cope through emotional confrontation and eventual escape from it. Neither path erased the pain. And perhaps that is why stories involving Princess and continue circulating with such emotional force. Because whether the alleged conversation happened exactly as rumored almost becomes secondary. What truly resonates is the underlying idea behind it. That Diana may have recognized, long before anyone else, that Harry's greatest struggle would never simply be royal pressure. It would be the impossible challenge of trying to remain emotionally whole while living inside a system that often demanded emotional silence to survive. Perhaps the most tragic element of this entire royal conflict is that the people involved may all believe they are protecting something important. Yet in the process, they continue drifting further apart emotionally. For Prince Harry, the fight appears deeply personal. His interviews, memoirs, and public statements often suggest a man trying to reclaim control over his own narrative after years of emotional suppression. Again and again, Harry has returned to the same themes: trauma, loss, protection, fear, and the desperate need to break cycles that he believes damaged his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales. But from inside the monarchy, the situation may look entirely different. To senior royals, public emotional disclosures can threaten institutional stability itself. The British monarchy survives largely through continuity, symbolism, and carefully controlled public confidence. Internal conflict is expected to remain private. Public vulnerability is tolerated only within limits. Once private pain becomes international spectacle, the institution begins losing control of its own image. That tension between emotional truth and institutional survival may be the hidden force underneath the entire Harry crisis. And perhaps nobody understands that balance better than Princess Anne. Throughout her life, and became known for placing duty above almost everything else. She maintained a relentless work schedule, avoided media scandals whenever possible, and rarely displayed public emotion. Many people inside Britain view her as one of the monarchy's most dependable figures precisely because she represents discipline without drama. Which is why speculation surrounding her alleged conversation with Harry carries such emotional weight. Because if someone like and privately acknowledged Diana's concerns about Harry, it would suggest that even the institution's strongest defenders may quietly recognize the emotional costs hidden beneath royal life. Royal biographers often note that Anne and Diana were never emotionally similar personalities. Diana thrived on emotional connection and public warmth, and valued privacy, resilience, and emotional restraint. Yet despite those differences, and witnessed firsthand how royal systems can isolate emotionally vulnerable individuals over time. And Harry may have inherited more of Diana's emotional temperament than anyone initially realized. As years passed, Harry increasingly spoke about feeling trapped between public expectation and personal well-being. The pressure intensified after marriage, fatherhood, and growing hostility from sections of the media. What began as frustration gradually transformed into something far more serious: emotional alienation from the institution itself. That alienation reportedly affected family relationships at every level. Rumors of tension between Harry and Prince William became constant tabloid material. Reports suggested communication between the brothers nearly collapsed during certain periods. Meetings were described as tense, brief, and emotionally distant. For a public that once saw the brothers comforting each other behind Diana's coffin, the deterioration felt heartbreaking, because people were not simply watching royal disagreement. They were watching the collapse of a bond built through shared tragedy. Some royal historians believe William and Harry essentially became symbols of two different survival strategies after Diana's death. William adapted by moving closer to royal structure and future responsibility. Harry moved toward emotional confrontation and eventual separation from the institution. Both responses emerged from grief, but they led the brothers in opposite directions. And somewhere in that painful divide sits the unresolved memory of Diana herself. Even today, nearly every discussion involving Harry eventually returns to her. Her interviews, her loneliness, her media battles, her emotional openness, her warnings about royal life. In many ways, Diana remains emotionally embedded inside the monarchy's modern identity crisis. That is why so many people became captivated by rumors involving Princess, and the idea that and may have privately reflected on Diana's fears gives emotional meaning to years of public conflict. It transforms royal drama into something more human and devastating. A mother's fears slowly becoming reality decades later. Whether the alleged conversation happened exactly as described may ultimately matter less than what the story represents emotionally, because many people already believe Diana saw warning signs long ago. She reportedly understood Harry's emotional sensitivity better than most people around him. She allegedly worried that palace expectations could eventually overwhelm him psychologically. And she may have feared that, unlike William, Harry would never fully find peace inside the rigid hierarchy of royal life. Looking back now, those fears no longer sound impossible. Today, Harry lives thousands of miles away from the institution he was born into. Public trust between family members remains fragile. Royal appearances continue without him. Interviews continue. Speculation continues. Yet despite physical distance, emotional ties to the monarchy, and especially to Diana, still appear impossible for Harry to fully escape. Because grief does not disappear simply because someone leaves the place where it began. And perhaps that is the cruelest irony of all. Harry may have escaped palace walls, media systems, and royal obligations. But the emotional legacy left behind by Diana's death still seems to follow him everywhere. Every interview, every conflict, every attempt at reinvention eventually circles back to the same unanswered question. What if Diana truly knew, years before anyone else, that her youngest son would spend his entire adult life struggling to survive the very system he was born into?